We've talked in depth about every TV incarnation of the Doctor on this channel, with the exception of the Eighth Doctor. In 1996, Paul McGann made his debut as the Doctor in a TV movie pilot that was never picked up for a series. In 1999, Big Finish Productions was formed to tell new stories with classic Doctors on audio. By 2001, Paul McGann had joined his fellow Doctors by recording new adventures with them and had joined the company's monthly range of releases. However, by 2006, the Eighth Doctor was given a bit of a makeover. The new series had been broadcasting for just over 2 years now, and the first series with the Eighth Doctor and new companion Lucie Miller, played by Sheridan Smith, was seen to be a jumping-on point for a new generation of fans who had gotten into the series by the revival. Series 1 was released monthly on CD and on BBC Radio 7 in 2007. The format was slightly different to the monthly range of Big Finish. Instead of each story being 90 or even 150 minutes long, each instalment would be 50 minutes long, akin to a new series episode. I'm here today to go through all 6 stories of Series 1, which I listened to when Big Finish repackaged their adventures in a digital download in 2023. Without further ado, let's begin with Blood of the Daleks. Kicking off the series with one of the Doctor's greatest enemies, we have Blood of the Daleks, which is also Lucie Miller's debut as a companion. The Eighth Doctor is travelling alone, but to his puzzlement, Lucie Miller appears in the TARDIS. He attempts to return her to the north of England in 2006, but finds that a temporal shield prevents him from landing there. Instead, the two find themselves on the human colony world Red Rocket Rising, which has suffered an asteroid strike. The survivors include the colony's acting president, Eileen Clint, disgraced scientist Asher Griven, and the apparently paranoid Tom Cardwell. Clint receives a message from a Dalek fleet offering rescue to the colony's citizens and accepts the offer, believing the Daleks to be fully benevolent. Asher is in reality Professor Martez, who has created a new race of Daleks, but the invading Daleks see Martez's creations as impure, and it's up to the Doctor and Lucie to survive a full-scale Dalek civil war in one piece. The first thing that stands out to me is the introduction of Lucie Miller. Rather than meeting her in present-day Earth and asking if she wants to travel, the Doctor has essentially been dumped with Lucie, and it makes an interesting dynamic for this story as they don't fully trust each other and get on each other's nerves, but it's not too grating that you don't want to see them together. Lucie is dumped on the Doctor by the Time Lords in a witness protection scheme. She has seen something that she cannot remember, and her life is in danger because of it. As far as Lucie is concerned, she is supposed to be on her way to her first day at work, and she is not thrilled to find instead that she has been shoved in a magical cupboard and sent to a post-apocalyptic world. What I like about this approach is that the viewer is asked to take most of this on faith and on Lucie's word, and because she is pretty unlikable for most of the first episode, you have to wonder if something far more insidious is going on here. I really like how suspicious the Eighth Doctor is of her. Clearly he's had his fingers burnt in the past with companions, and it's great to see a bit of northern attitude in the TARDIS. She's cagey because she doesn't quite trust the Doctor either. Furthermore, her naivety is really well handled here. By the middle of the first episode, she'd rather hitch a ride with the Daleks than the Doctor, and even by the end, their relationship will need to thaw out some more. It's a brilliant starting point for this Doctor-companion dynamic. The planet of Red Rocket Rising is appropriately realised. The fallout of the asteroid strike is literal acid rain, earthquakes, tidal waves, and most of the population dead within minutes. Professor Martez needed human tissue, so he violated barely dug graves and took living specimens. These events really sell the dire need the planet is in, which raises the stakes brilliantly. Even with the Daleks, writer Steve Lyons still finds new and inventive ways to tell a story with them. They initially appear benevolent and passionate saviours of humanity, but I appreciate the take on Dalek purity here. Martez found a crashed Dalek spaceship and began to turn his own people into Dalek mutants based on the creatures he found in the wreckage. He sent out an invitation to the Daleks to help them with a birthing of a new strand of Daleks, but instead they deflected the asteroid in an attempt to destroy what they consider abominations to the Dalek race. When they realised they didn't succeed, they land under the cover of passion and benevolence to find the mutants and murder them once and for all. The Daleks shot down the Exodus ships and the iconic dust in the atmospheres from the engines of the evacuating ships. Professor Martez realises what she has done when Daleks call their own brothers reinforcements, their creed is that everyone is an enemy of the Daleks, everyone must die, and all this death and destruction doesn't make them rethink that one bit. To summarise, Blood of the Daleks is a very meaty way to kick off this new 8th Doctor series. Whilst it has a lot to set up in the first act, as soon as the Daleks arrive, the story goes from strength to strength. Paul McGann and Sheridan Smith get to butt heads furiously throughout, but there are hints of the magic to come, and this is certainly an intriguing take on the usual orphan companion introduction. The Daleks are patient, malicious, and evil, and it kicks off the series in such a dynamic way that will leave you wanting more. Speaking of which, Horror of Glam Rock. Written by Paul Magras, the Doctor and Lucie go glam when the TARDIS makes an unexpected landing in 1974. Slade, the Sweet, and Susie Quattro are top of the pops, and brother and sister duo the Tomorrow Twins will soon be joining them, if Arnold Corns, a star-making Svengali, has his way. But will the dream turn to dust at a service station somewhere on the M62, besieged by a pack of alien monsters? After the action-packed two-parter and the rather frosty relationship between the 8th Doctor and Lucie Miller established, Horror of Glam Rock lightens the mood somewhat, and shows their dynamic becoming a lot more softer. Lucie is still adapting to life aboard the TARDIS, and even meets her Auntie Pat from the 1970s. The setting of a small service station makes for a nice base under siege vibe, without actually feeling bogged down as a typical base under siege story, and makes this all the more unique. Whilst not the strongest plot, Glam Rock certainly boasts an excellent supporting cast. Bernard Cribbins adds some charm as record manager Arnold Corns, Una Stubbs makes for a heartwarming flow, Lindsay Hardwick convinces as Auntie Pat as a character who's completely out of her depth in this situation. The cast is just uniformly excellent. The villains of this piece are the only ones, beautiful wraith-like beings coming out of the stylophone with graceful wooing. All they want to do is eat through Tommy's adoring fans. Human beings are high in polyunsaturates, apparently. They're a fairly competent threat that complement the rock and roll setting of the 1970s. The best way to describe Horror of Glam Rock is that it is competent, but with a touch of eccentricity. The cast are superb and give the warm material some real oomph, and the story concludes nicely. It may not appeal to everybody, but it's another example of how this new series of 8th Doctor adventures are not going to play completely by the rules. It's a real breath of fresh air that's not entirely beloved by me, but it's certainly an engaging listen. Speaking of beloved, Immortal Beloved. Written by Jonathan Clements, the Doctor and Lucie Miller land the TARDIS next to a cliff in what appears to be ancient Greece. Two star-crossed lovers, Kalkin and Sarati, have been preparing to kill themselves nearby, but the Doctor and Lucie prevent this, and soon anachronistic helicopters surround all of them. One of the soldiers who disembarks, General Ares, is gravely injured in the ensuing struggle. The Doctor just about saves his life, and he, Lucie, Sarati and Kalkin are taken back to a grand palace, where, to their horror, they witness the ailing Ares' mind being transferred into the body of another man, one of the soldiers who has expected this, and is entirely willing to sacrifice himself for his destiny. The Doctor confronts Zeus, the autocratic ruler of this strange society, where guns are labelled as magic wands, and the high-tech mind transfer device is an incarnation chamber. Zeus admits that he is not really a god, and reveals that they are on a lost Earth colony planet in Lucie's distant future. The story just hooks you from the start. The suicidal opening is arresting, a prince and his loved one willing to jump from a mountainside to protect their love. What could have driven them to this? As pointed out by Lucie, this story is very Romeo and Juliet, but of course with a sci-fi twist to it that I found to be really enjoyable. This is a story where Greek gods legend meets traditional melodramatic romance, meets futuristic scientific ethical debate, meets Doctor Who. Despite all of these elements not being completely original, the putting of them together is fantastically whimsical to make it feel like it's original, like you're hearing this for the first time. The notion of immortality through cloning and the appearance of gods is superbly executed through very tight writing and excellent direction. The characters are wonderful and memorable, every single one, which for a Big Finish story is quite an achievement. The most important and standout for me is Ian McNeice as Zeus, who is an excellent character because he's not a traditional moustache-twirling villain. He has much more dimension than most Doctor Who villains gives us, because his evilness is how he survives. To him, it is all completely justified. He's not a megalomaniac trying to conquer planets or the universe in order to achieve absolute power. He's just a man so afraid of death that in his eyes, what he is doing is not only justified, but it's right. Elspeth Grey's Hera is also really unnerving as well, because she seems so unbalanced and not quite there. She's so caught up in this world that it is all she can see clearly. The repetition and cycle of cloning has become so ingrained into her life that she can't fathom a life or purpose beyond it. And her character does have her darker moments, which makes her a player in this story to be remembered. Calkin and Sarati are presented as the melodramatic young lovers trope from something like Commedia dell'arte, to the point where even the Doctor and Lucie see them as such. However, this could not be further from the truth, as these two characters are pushed to their limits just to be together. The romantic and emotionally driven themes in this story add to the ethical debate about cloning. I found that all the ethical conversations were very maturely handled and weren't gratuitous or inconsequential. Both sides of the argument were given space for explanation, and whilst we are always aware of who is in the right, there's still a wonderful moral ambiguity about it all, which you need in a story that is very concept-driven. The nature of the cloning, which is depicted as merciless, brutal, and messy, works strongly with the story's themes, especially the dispatching of the previous bodies. It's such a dark story, and that's what makes me really love it. The human drama in this is uncomfortable to listen to at times. The desperation, anger and fear which Sarati and Calkin feel, especially when they are drawn to what they view as their only option, suicide, is very well handled. Their anguish at being brainwashed and deleted from their own minds is very unsettling. On the other end of the scale, the acceptance and even willingness a character like Taden displays towards his own transferal is equally as disquieting, showing someone who has effectively been brainwashed. Towards the end, the deaths of Hera and Zeus are magically violent and dark, fitting for such brutal characters and very satisfying. This is such an overlooked gem of the first series that I don't see many people talk about, and it most definitely deserves another listen. My only criticism is that I feel a longer running time would benefit to explore its dramatic ideas in particular, as the ending does feel very rushed because it is condensed, and this story can feel very punchy and thoughtful as well. It's Lucie Miller's coming-of-age story, and Paul McGann continues to impress as a more tougher and harder version of the Eighth Doctor. Immortal Beloved flew by on a listen and had just enough set pieces and moments of discussion to really drive home its intriguing and thought-provoking ideas. Phobos. Written by Eddie Robson, the TARDIS lands on Phobos, moon of Mars where extreme sport nuts of the future indulge their passion for gravity boarding and wormhole jumping. But there's something lurking in the shadows, something infinitely old and infinitely dangerous. It's not for nothing that Phobos is the ancient word for fear. Whilst the premise is fairly interesting, I find this story to be the weakest of Series 1. The idea of extreme sports with a sci-fi twist is executed competently well. Luna Park on Phobos has been left to look after itself, and the squatters claim the environment dome. The wormhole is a vertical tunnel you can jump down and never hit the sides. Drennies are adrenaline junkies that come to the planet for kicks, an entity built a singularity bridge between our reality and theirs, and it feeds off the fear, and if it gets strong enough, it will break into our universe. Sadly, there isn't much substance to this story, and the idea of a godlike entity that feeds on fear and a human threat, trying to distract them from the real problem, is fairly predictable, and it's been done a lot better in other places on both TV and on Big Finish. Beyond the confines of the initial premise and the unique setting, there's not much to Phobos, with the whole episode having a very mid-season feel to it. The best thing about this story, though, that's worth mentioning is easily Paul McGann's Eighth Doctor. The narrative this time around does a wonderful job at showing off both the lighter and darker sides to his character, from his childlike enthusiasm at the unusual nature of the environment, to his nastier impulses and deep-rooted fears that come out when pushed by the wrong entity. It really exemplifies Paul McGann's range as an actor. Despite good sprinkled here and there, Phobos is easily the weakest of Series 1, and I would only recommend for completionists. No More Lies. Written by Paul Sutton, No More Lies supposedly has two separate events involving a disintegrating spaceship to a posh garden party where a wealthy couple are celebrating their love for each other in style. Gatecrashers, the Doctor and Lucie think they know what the answer is, but they're not the only uninvited guests. Ferocious alien warriors riding pterodactyl-like vortisaurs are about to make their entrance. This story is a more of a fun, experimental, character-driven tale that I had fun listening to. What helps the story stay good, even as the listener tries to work out what's going on, is the cast, who in general are pretty spectacular here. Paul McGann and Sheridan Smith are both wonderful, with the Eighth Doctor more or less in his usual romantic time traveller persona, and Lucie as a standard feisty self. By this point, the two have really established a strong rapport with each other, though they don't admit to truly liking each other just yet, which is nice to hear as the pair come up on the first real test of their companionship in the following story. I appreciate a story that opens with the Doctor already firmly embedded in the narrative, which doesn't kill the pacing, as it involves Zimmerman, who is selling rare time travel technology that will kill millions in the wrong hands. The Doctor and Lucie arrive decades later in Zimmerman's time stream, where somebody has time looped a garden party. It's revealed that Zimmerman has turned over a new leaf. He fell in love with Rachel, told her the truth about his heritage, cheated on her and fallen for her all over again. It's a pretty strong premise, even if the story is overstuffed. These character-based tales in the 45-minute format are very well appreciated. There was just enough time here to set up the situation and give it some meat before revealing why the time loop had been set up in the first place, and ends on a cliffhanger that leads very nicely into the finale. Human Resources. Written by Eddie Robson, Human Resources is structurally similar to the series opener, a two-parter that involves an old enemy of the Doctor. This time, it's the Cybermen. The finale involves Lucie Miller being headhunted to join the staff of Hulbert Logistics, a respectable blue-chip firm in Telford. Great prospects, competitive salary, you don't have to be mad to work here. But wasn't she made for better things, like travelling in the TARDIS through time and space? The Doctor, meanwhile, has been fired, into a confrontation with some of his most terrifying enemies. The Doctor's characterisation is on top form for the finale. All of his bubbling anger comes rushing to the surface as he confronts Time Lords, businessmen and Cybermen alike. And by the finale, Paul McGann and Sheridan Smith are practically finishing off each other's sentences with magical chemistry, and that makes the possibility of their split even more intense. This is supposedly Lucie Miller's first day at a new job, and she wonders if her travels with the Doctor was all just a dream. Lucie discovers that she was supposed to be a dictator, and the manipulation in her life by the Time Lords. Humans can't be trusted to make their own decisions, so they are nudged this way and that and told that this is for their own good. She is just a made-up person. She's appalled at this and screams, "Don't tell me how to react." As her life falls to pieces, she holds the Doctor at gunpoint and even runs off from him. She wants to get back at the people who have been messing with her. She wants to take on the Time Lords. Lucie will never have anyone telling her what to do or how to run her life. And there's no reason for Lucie to stay with the Doctor, but now she chooses to, and even the Doctor admits she has been good company. It's a terrific story for this TARDIS team. Human Resources ties up the threads and mysteries of the first 8th Doctor series arc in a surprisingly manageable way, given how over the top it could have gone with its premise and ideas. And that's not to say that this story isn't huge or massive in places. It's a two-part Cyberman finale, and so a certain amount of scale and energy is kind of a given at this point. But compared to other big endings featuring these foes, Eddie Robson's script is surprisingly subdued, which really works to its advantage in helping it to stand out as a unique finale. A lot of that novelty comes down to the atmospheric soundscape created in the first half, which consists of a wonderfully tedious corporative environment that's full of appropriately bland dialogue, but also works in keeping you strangely uneasy as more details are steadily revealed. The direction really nails the banal evil of the whole story in a way that not many other stories handle quite as well, and treating alien invasions as a sort of 9-to-5 profession feels reminiscent of the ways that the Nazis would treat the killing of people in extermination camps like a cushy office job. Lots of indirect euphemisms are thrown about to dance around the idea of what's really going on, and it's only when the Doctor gets a sales pitch from the head of the office, Todd Hulbert, that we are fully given the devastating scope of the organisation's operations at hand. But once the Cyber Menace does really come into the picture, everything gets blown sky high in terms of scale, full of exciting reveals and twists, some of which land, and others which struggle a little bit in delivery. The biggest issue with this story, I do think, is the way Lucie's initial arc ends up concluding. After all the build-up and mystery surrounding her characters and what the Time Lords actually went with her, the big final answer is a bit of a convoluted mess that feels unsatisfying, and it doesn't amount to much despite the good performances and the good dialogue that I mentioned earlier. A lot of details behind why she's so special to the Headhunter's plans are sort of left behind in the dust, and despite the script's attempts to justify it in the narrative, with some choice bits of dialogue related to an otherwise forgettable side character, it makes for a pretty unsatisfactory payoff, all things considered. Having the Cybermen, though, be older remnants from their earliest homeworld is a brilliant touch of continuity, and having them start out as the victims of the story rather than the aggressors, it's a nice touch that serves to highlight both them and their persecutors in different roles than the universe usually gives them. It culminates in a big explosive battle, the usual life-changing revelations, and a new start for the future that leaves more than enough open for the next couple of seasons to pick up and run with. At its core, Human Resources is a standard season finale adventure for the 8th Doctor adventures that just so happens to have an incredibly unique idea behind its featured baddies and a novel settlement that backs it up. It's not quite as strong in narrative and energy as the series opener, featuring another classic Doctor Who monster, and some of the threads being built across this entire first series of adventures are quite fumbled in execution. But when it's firing on all cylinders, it's a very entertaining adventure that features Paul McGann and Lucie Miller in their most confident performances together yet. An interesting soundscape and concept in theory, and a fascinating use of the Cybermen that flips things around on their head, while still tying nicely into the past of the show. And that about sums up the first series of the 8th Doctor and Lucie Miller. Overall, it's a very strong and comfy season. There's a mix of great, good and average, but nothing in this season that I think is outright awful or bad. If you want to get into Big Finish and you're not sure where to start, I can highly recommend this as a jumping on point, as it has the pacing akin to the new series, a story arc, and familiar monsters like the Daleks and the Cybermen that fans love to see. But carrying this series is Paul McGann and Sheridan Smith's sparkling chemistry that has great potential for the future. A highly recommended series. And that's all from me today. Thank you very much for joining me. I will see you very soon for more videos.